Mayor White, did you see my email about, I'm sorry I jumped into your, and put my hand up, it was meant to be for the adoption of the agenda for the committee of the whole. And in my mind, I jumped ahead.
Okay.
So I sent you an email that we may have a late edition, if you can adopt the agenda as amended to allow. I'll give this to you.
We didn't talk about planning and what it is, so it's.
Here, you can have that. That's what I sent you.
Yes, but could you tell me what it is?
Oh,
Oh, there it is, the thing we're gonna talk about.
Yeah.
Got it.
got it?
Well, it's, I was going to, it's just so much easier this way than when you're on an screen.
Oh,
Or
for
it's
sure.
a screen and I'm still trying to follow it, and when you say it like this, it's just like, you know, you can get it respectively so much better.
That's, my brain was like, do we, don't we? I can't remember. Yeah. You're live now?
Go by this.
You're live now.
At any point, one of us could become and do something. Yeah.
Our clock has gone off again.
It's,
It's always like 1 minute off. Hour and 1 minute.
Yeah.
okay.
Now we're on to our committee of the whole agenda. And I will call committee of the whole to order. We first need to approve the agenda. Moved by Councillor Kroll, seconded by Councillor Lumley. And right, there isn't, the amendment is not on here. So we do have an amendment to the agenda. Sorry, I gave that piece of paper back. I shouldn't have. I've got it on my emails here, though. It's okay. It's okay. I'll find it. Yeah. Well, there are a few different emails, so. I've got multiple emails from our corporate officer this morning. I don't want to read one out that wasn't is not what we want to add to the agenda. So we also need to add a motion to go to in-camera, it would be, under section 91K, which is relates to negotiations and related discussions respecting the proposed provision of a municipal service that are at the preliminary stages and in the view of council could reasonably be expected to harm the interests of the municipality if held in public. So with that amendment, that's okay. Any discussion to adopt the agenda? All those in favor? The motion carries. And our first report is from our natural assets technician, Michelle Lewis. Thanks for being here.
Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Thank you, Mayor White. The purpose of this report and presentation is to provide a status update on the recommendations outlined in the 2013 Aquifer Mapping Study and to propose actions to implement the recommendations of the 2021 Aquifer Mapping Study update, which hereafter I will call the Aquifer Report. As most of us know, the town pumps its drinking water up from the ground. In this image, it's shown as orange on the left. And it's Aquifer 560, or the Vashon Till, which is also referenced in many documents as the Gibsons Aquifer, because the lobe from which we draw our drinking water is underneath the town of Gibsons. The aquifer has 3 distinct lobes that are understood to be disconnected from each other by the presence of ridges of bedrock separating them, shown in pink on the image on the left. The image on the right shows the location and recharge area for the Gibsons Aquifer. The blue, the bright blue, is the aquifer groundwater area, and the purple and gray areas are the individual creek watersheds that make up the aquifer recharge area. Also shown are the tributaries and streams that make up the watershed and recharge the aquifers. This image is important because it highlights the extent of the area of influences the aquifer. It highlights the extent of the areas of influence in the aquifer and affects drinking water quantity and quality. Recommendations from both the 2013 Aquifer Mapping Study and the updated Aquifer Report are included in Appendix A of your staff report. These recommendations can be categorized under what you see on the screen, which is engagement and collaboration, monitoring, planning, conservation, and infrastructure. The Appendix A also provides updates on all of the recommendations to date. So I'll just go into the proposed projects under the recommendations of the Aquifer Report. At a high level, the installing monitoring wells, installing precipitation and temperature stations, a flow accretion study, updating aquifer policies, and developing a watershed management area. So I'll just go into a bit of detail on each of these projects. The Aquifer Report suggested and recommended the installation of additional monitoring wells in Lower Gibsons to help characterize the competency of the confining unit of the Capilano Aquifer. Competency of the confining unit and of the Capilano Aquifer, in addition to monitoring the hydraulic connection between surface and groundwater. The drilling would provide collection of samples to help understand infiltration rates and to enable the town to monitor both the Capilano and the Gibsons Aquifer from one monitoring well. So as you can see on the screen, the proposed locations are shown as blue dots. As part of the Chester Creek study proposal from 2022, staff will be installing 5 climate stations for precipitation and temperature that will support water management for the town of Gibsons and initiate a sustainable monitoring network for future studies. It's recommended that multiple stations be installed to better represent the complex distribution of precipitation expected in the region. Current stations that provide hourly data are located in Seashelt and Langdale and are not an accurate representation for this area. Climate data would provide direct information of precipitation to infiltration to aquifer recharge. Another project under the Chester Creek study is a flow accretion study, or an infiltration study. Building on the data collected from the previously installed hydrometric stations in the town creeks, a flow accretion study will further characterize groundwater recharge and discharge zones along Chester Creek. This involves performing flow measurements from downstream to upstream along the creek and its tributaries, starting at the existing Chester Creek Monitoring Station, which is located by Bonnybrook Lodge, to the headwaters of Chester Creek. This data collected will identify major sources of infiltration to the aquifer, in addition to areas where the artesian pressure of the aquifer is recharging the creeks. So we understand that the confining unit, or the aquitard, of the Gibsons Aquifer is thickest across Upper Gibsons and thins significantly in Lower Gibsons. As such, risks to the aquifer vary between locations. In Upper Gibsons, contamination and pollution are the highest concern through infiltration, while in Lower Gibsons, breach of the aquitard is the most significant risk. Staff recommend updating policies in section 6.5 of the official community plan, protecting the aquifer, to include recommendations of the aquifer report to further minimize risk. Identified policies could include identifying potential contaminant sources over the aquifer, for developing a comprehensive program for water testing of town wells, investigating the upper reaches of Chasta Creek and Gibson Creek watersheds to assess the recharge characteristics of the aquifer and its component lobes, and installing additional monitoring wells near Town Well 3, which I showed in the earlier slide, to help characterize the competency of the confining unit and the Capilano aquifer. In addition to the OCP policy update, staff recommend reviewing other bylaws associated with aquifer protection to ensure protection measures continue to be effective and are up to date. Bylaws that may require an update will be discussed in the next slide. Pardon me. So currently in place is the Water Regulation Bylaw 1192, and it clarifies drilling permit requirements and identifies risk tolerance. I've put status of the current policy work on the right-hand side of the slide, just to give you a bit of clarity as to where we're at now. The Subdivision and Development Servicing and Stormwater Management Bylaw, an update could be done to clarify subdivision requirements near wells, stormwater management to ensure appropriate drainage and aquifer infiltration, and any additional risks to the aquifer as a result of a building or subdivision. This work has not yet started, but is hopefully going to be happening in the next year or so. OCP bylaw could be updated to update the OCP policies and development permit area guidelines pertaining to development within the aquifer protection area. As new drilling information was included in the aquifer report, staff will be looking at updating the DPA boundary to reflect this new information. Bylaw notice enforcement bylaw could be updated to incorporate associated fines and regulatory enforcement on aquifer protection. The town, what pulled from the current bylaw notice enforcement bylaw, the policy states the town will implement appropriate enforcement mechanisms for unauthorized excavations and other activities that could damage or pollute the aquifer. So, how will these proposed policy updates impact current development projects in the Lower Gibsons Aquifer Protection Area, known as DPA 9? The town have briefed active project proponents of the impending policy work. The affected developments are already being peer reviewed as part of the process outlined in the current water regulation bylaw. Changes to DPA 9 regulations and the creation of a risk management policy will be coming in the next couple of weeks, led by the directors of planning and infrastructure and supported by the town's hydrogeology and geotechnical consultants. And finally, staff are recommending the development of a watershed management area plan for Aquifer 560, which could include the aforementioned risk management policy, a water sustainability plan, groundwater sustainability assessment, wellhead protection study, and emergency response plan. These policies, plans, assessments, and studies are recommended as components of an overarching watershed management area plan, which was previously called the Groundwater Management Zone in the 2013 Aquifer Report. Staff have initiated this work and will provide updates later in 2023. And I will pass it over to Council for any questions.
Thank you. Thank you for the report. It's great to see our data well used like this and turned into follow-up policy action. And I will look to Council for questions. Councillor Lumley.
Thank you. I guess through the chair, I was just wondering, we're setting this like we're increasing our risk or our non-risk factor, like say even I'll say zero risk for aquifer protection. But I know you alluded to the fact that the developers in DPA 9 they're actually using our old, they're working with our old, I think it's what it's called, groundwater management. If this information comes within the next couple weeks or a month that says something that may be appropriate with the current one is no longer appropriate, would this supersede that? Like if somebody starts a development under one, yeah.
What I heard from the report is that peer reviews are being done, that's the process now, so that's the data that would be.
Peer reviews based on,
Based on the current water regulation bylaw.
so my point being is that if this comes back and we have to update our bylaw, which would nullify these peer reviews based on
Our
the current.
CAO.
Okay.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if I may, the water regulation bylaws is being used now. From what we've heard so far, we don't expect that bylaw and its powers to change, so that it's already a strong bylaw as it is, and it allows us to do a peer review that's more in line with the current direction of council. The DP9, it's sort of close to being completed. It will have some changes to it that are significant, particularly the defining the area of sensitivity of the aquifer. But in terms of what we use as a tool to enact the requirements of DP9 is the water regulation bylaw, and that's already in place for us to do that work.
Thank you. Councillor Kroll.
Thank you, Mayor White, and thank you for the report on, the additional monitoring wells that are being put in. Is there any expectation or hope to get more monitoring wells outside of the town's boundary? I also have this concern that there are activities happening outside our boundaries, and it would be perhaps advantageous to have additional monitoring wells because there are wells being drilled into the aquifer outside of our area. So I'm just wondering, is there any expectation for looking to additional wells outside the boundary of our town? Thank you.
And additionally to that, how much access do we have to the Mahan Road monitoring? Do we have full access to that data from the SCRD?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we have had conversations with staff at the regional district about the potential for there to be data sharing for monitoring wells that they may be developing. I am aware that there is some budget that was approved a number of years ago that was earmarked for monitoring in that particular area. Presumably that may be an opportunity for some data sharing, depending on what direction they choose to go with that funding. As of right now, the focus for the monitoring wells is within our town boundary. Depending on whether or not there is more monitoring wells developed by the regional district outside of the town, if that does not happen, then there may be an opportunity and advantage for expansion of our monitoring network in the future to go beyond the town boundary. And then as far as data sharing, I'm not sure if they have continuous data logging of the Mahan Road well. If they do at the regional district, then there certainly could be an opportunity to share that information.
Thank you, Director of Infrastructure Services. Follow up, Councillor Kroll.
Thank you, Mayor White. To your point with respect to the regional district and their new interest in the aquifer because of the Church Road well, might we expect they might consider putting, or have you had any indication that they might be putting in additional monitoring wells outside the town's boundary?
That's through the chair, yeah.
Through you, as Mayor, I don't know for certain whether that has been committed or not, but I am aware that I believe in 2021 there was some budget that was allotted for it. I don't know if any action has been taken on that to date.
CAO.
through you, Mr. Mayor, further to that, the watershed agreement or the bulk water agreement, which we have with the regional district, envisions a situation where we share that information and that data, but also the burden of having these monitoring wells installed. So the SCRD is aware of our interest in working with them and explaining the DAN work for their benefit and ours. And I should note that all this information, even for wells that are outside the town, are submitted to the province, and the province themselves have access to this information, and indirectly, we have access to that too.
Now, I'm relatively confident. I read a report just in the last week from the SCRD, and it was from previous projects, but that there is a project underway to have a monitoring well at Marianne West Park. Not a water yet to, or not a well yet to draw water, but a monitoring well, and that was looking to be completed, I think, at the end of the Q4 2022. But I haven't. My understanding is that's one of the carry forwards. It hasn't actually been done yet. So I don't know if. I don't think there was any. I think Councillor Lumley attended a meeting where that was discussed, but I don't think there was any indication there that it was done yet either. Councillor DeAndretti.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks, Michelle. Yeah, I'm really thrilled to see this report in front of council, and I fully support all recommendations, of course. One, Mr. White, issue that I have a little bit of concern because our delegation authority bylaw right now gives the staff authority to make any decisions regarding development, regarding GPA 9, 1, and 2. So I would like to make a motion right now, and hopefully that staff supports that we bring the delegation authority bylaw forward, and we look at the bylaw to understand, and this is the best course, because I think when comes levels of risk, it should be a council decision. So that's my motion. I hope I have some support.
Okay, is there a seconder for that motion? I think this may have come up last term. It's a lot of, I think there'd be a lot of discussion before we, but we need to, when it comes forward like as a motion like this, rather than maybe a notice of motion for a future meeting, we really need a seconder to go forward with it. But, okay. We could have further discussion in the context of this report, maybe. I don't see a seconder.
That would be nice to discuss it.
Yeah. CAO?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the DP9 report that planning and infrastructure are working on will not be silent to the delegation portion of the bylaw, which I think goes in hand with the bylaw itself. And so I think ourselves, from staff perspective, the update to that portion of the bylaw will inevitably come to council consideration because there's changes there. We're certainly very supportive of that. We want to have a process that when we're working on your behalf, there's confidence there that it's being done as envisioned. So even in the absence of a resolution from council, I can comfortably say that that issue will be in front of you to consider further.
And that's part of the DPA 9 report, so that'll be, that I think is going to be in the next couple of weeks, right? When we talked about some of this.
We'll do our best to meet that timeline, Mr. Mayor. It will take a week.
I heard a couple of weeks in in the report, and I think that's coming up first, though, as one of the steps. So, right? I think I've seen that on the agenda. Anyway, we'll do our best. So that's a priority for sure. Any more questions for the report, Councillor Thompson?
Great report. Thank you. I have in my notes, and I was just looking for it again in the report, and I couldn't find it, but there was the mention of water losses from town distribution system. Can you elaborate on that for me?
Through you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, I'll take the question. Go ahead.
Thank you. So part of it was from, there's overflow because we have artesian pressure within the aquifer, meaning that there's this upward pressure. And so, for example, right down here in Holland Park, there's an overflow. And so when the town wells are pumping in a certain sequence, then in the past there was significant overflow or more overflow coming from that. So that was one thing that was addressed after the 2013 aquifer report, looking at different ways to run the distribution system so that, or the pumping system so that we would reduce that overflow. And I think the other piece to that would be looking at leak detection and metering and all those kind of things, just to look at reducing any kind of waste.
Those comments through Mr. Mayor, the comments on the report are a little bit dated. It comes from the 2013, where at that time, for the first 4 or 5 years, we spent most of our time replacing old pipes and quite a bit of regular breakage. So we're seeing a lot less of those types of losses. Last summer, we experienced some in one of the older lines we have on Skyline Drive, and you've seen that on the capital program as sort of will further, and we're still a few years out, but we're making gains on sealing those pipes, I would say.
Thank you. And we do have a recommendation associated with this report. Are you moving that, Councillor? Moved by Councillor Kroll. There's a seconder, seconded by Councillor Thompson. Any discussion on the recommendation? Okay, all those in favor of the recommendation, which is on page 5, the motion carries. Thank you, Michelle. And our next item is the 2023 to 2027 General Services Preliminary 5-Year Capital Plan, presented by our Director of Infrastructure Services.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just one moment, please, to get me the screen sharing set up here. All right, here we go. This is substantially less visually interesting than the last presentation. Presented for council is the general capital budget for the capital, or sorry, the general services fund for 2023 to 2027, with focus predominantly on the year 2023. This contains roughly $184,000 in funding that is would either be required from taxation or from other funding source. And that's based on previous discussions around the general services operating fund and the taxation rate. There is one recommendation contained within this report, and that's for direction on commitment of the $122,000 in LG CAP. So that's the Local Government Climate Action Program funding that the town receives from the province. There is a recommendation here from staff to direct that funding towards the carbon neutral plan for corporate operations and the urban forest strategy. But there are alternatives provided in this report. And I should apologize. I see that on page 7 of this report, so page 24 of the agenda, there's a missing heading. So just below next steps, there's a paragraph and a gap. In that gap, there should be a heading that says recommendations or alternatives. So just if you're looking at that, there's just that missing heading. And all the detail is really in the spreadsheet and in the report, so I'll leave it to council to address and bring forward any questions that they may have. Thank you.
Okay. All kinds of different shapes of paper for this one. And we do have a recommendation associated with this report. I don't know if you spoken to that at all. But I'll just first look to council for general questions on the 2023 projects. Okay, Director.
I just want to see if that's legible to the room. I can zoom in a little bit more.
Good question. That is that the same one I have in front of me here? I think that's legible. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, I can't see that. Yeah, I don't know. If I do that and I can't see that, and I can't see this. So there are a lot of projects on here. It's going ahead a number of years here. And particularly we're looking at those 2023 projects right now.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, that's where particularly the conversation around the tax rate for this year and the impact that the capital program has on taxation would be focused on the 2023 projects.
Okay.
The projects are categorized, classified, so on the left-hand column, there's classifications from A through E. Classification A being anything that's previously committed funds or considered essential service or essential projects. And they basically from A down to D, the urgency or the requirement kind of lessens. Some clarity. If there's no immediate questions, I can speak to a couple of other comments from staff. There's two projects in here which are within the scope of a grant application that was submitted. The information on whether or not that grant application was successful has not been announced yet. However, due to the potential criticality of the projects, they have been included in this capital plan, and that being lines 31 and 32, the Beachcomber culvert replacement and the Sharman Creek retaining wall. Right now, those are being funded through a combination of taxation and reserves. The retaining wall is through a combination of taxation and reserves. The culvert is entirely funded from reserves. If we were to pull those projects out of the committed funding for 2023 and classify them as being pending grant funding, that would free up or reduce the tax burden for 2023, and it would also free up about $220,000 in reserve funding, which could be redistributed to some of the other projects in 2023, which would further reduce the tax load. So that would get us closer to being able to complete the bulk of this project list within the tax rate that was previously discussed. The only caveat to that is that if the condition of either the retaining wall or the existing culvert at Beachcomber Lane were to deteriorate further, it may get to a point where we need to be addressed as a emergency project, at which point funding would have to come from reserves and there may be a need to amend the financial plan.
Okay, I'll ask about that specifically because I know we had I came across at least one question from the public about the increased expected cost of that. Is that all due to inflation, or were there more factors to?
Through Mr. Mayor, so my understanding, so the history of this project predates my time here, but my understanding is originally it was conceived of replacing the culvert with a bridge, which may or may not have been vehicle access. It may have been a pedestrian bridge was considered, I believe, at one point in time. My understanding is as the design progressed, the complexity of the site, specifically there's a sanitary main that's crossing perpendicular to the culvert, made the logistics of a a bridge, and particularly say a small scale pedestrian bridge, to be not feasible to provide enough structure and protection for that sanitary main. It would have been exposed and vulnerable. So my understanding is that the design changed around the complexity of the site. There's also, some archaeological impacts as well, which have affected the ultimate cost. So I think the inflation, or the growth of the construction cost estimate is based on the design changing to address the specifics of the site, as well as inflation, and as well as, I think that initial cost estimate was a very high level cost estimate, which may have been low to begin with.
Okay, thank you. Any additional questions on this very ambitious, long list of projects here? I'm sure some incumbent councillors are probably more familiar with these and being in the capital plan in recent years. Councillor Lumley.
Quickly, I mean, I have a few questions. Maybe I'll just ask one and let the other councillors ask questions. But I was curious why the Glassford, it was broken up into two different sections on the budget.
Okay. Do we know what those two sections are?
Through you as mayor,
Okay.
I believe there's a line for Glassford traffic calming. My understanding is that was previously committed from a previous year, and that was to be focused on, I believe, some of the questions around being whether it be open or closed. And I think that funding was committed prior to the active transportation grant being received. I may or may not be correct about that. I may defer to the Director of Finance. You may have clarity on that.
Okay, thanks.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, not sure about the timing, but it's very close, and the Director of Infrastructure is correct. It's about the opening and closing, and that line, so it's separate from the active transportation grant, and that line is funded through gas tax.
Okay. Appreciate that question being asked, because it's the first time I've heard of that project being funded by anything other than that grant. So it's interesting. Didn't even know that when we had our public consultation session. I see Councillor DeAndrade next, and then Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Mayor. My question regards the long-term, the paved rehabilitation. And I wonder if there's a long plan in place where the public can become aware. And the reason I'm saying this is because I know at least in the past 3 years, some residents that talk about the situations on their roads, and I understand that this is going on even for 30 years. So I think my question and my suggestion, if there's nothing in place, but my question first is if there's a long-term plan that could be shared with the public.
Through you as mayor, there is a paving restoration plan. I believe it was prepared for the town maybe 2015, or might be a bit older than that. I think generally that the approach has been to try to address the identified highest priority paving projects there. The challenge is asphalt restoration, repaving is very costly, and it requires a significant funding commitment to, I think it would be worth considering a review of that paving plan with current paving costs to look at what funding would be required to actually be able to follow through with that plan. Right now, the focus with asphalt restoration is adjacent to projects where we have some utility construction, so there's some efficiencies. The road's going to be damaged from installation of water mains that requires asphalt restoration. Here's an opportunity to rehabilitate the full width of the road rather than just the narrow utility trench, and have that funding come from the asphalt restoration program. Yeah, I think I'll leave it for there for now.
Councilor Thompson.
Through you, Mayor, looking at the pedestrian cycling budget and the trail active transportation plan budget. So this is, the town will match the grant funding from the province. So I'm just trying to figure out what portion, because I see operating reserves accumulated surplus of 40 in the line item number 2. I just want to make sure that I'm understanding that correctly with the contribution from the town versus what's, and then my second question, because you'll probably touch on that at the same time too, is the reference to the Trail Active Transportation Master Plan. Is that a work in progress as part of this, or do we have something to reference to see what that full plan is?
Through you as the mayor. So the Trail Active Transportation Plan that you see, this line 6, that's the grant funded project. So that $80,000 is the total. So we see over on the right, there's $40,000 from reserves and $40,000 is from the grant. So we received a 50% grant funding. So our contribution is the $40,000 from reserves. The pedestrian cycle link above that, I believe that's the funding for the Reed Road multi-use path extension, which is design is underway. It has been, am I correct about that? I'm going to correct myself on that. So that the line at the top, that is the grant funding project, the grant funded project that the Glassford Road and Venture Way, Marine Way, those are all covered by that line item. There was the Reed Road multi-use path was in here, and we have deferred that until 2025 to align with when we're recommending replacement of the water main on Reed Road for efficiencies. And if I could ask through the mayor for you to maybe restate your second question, just so I'm clear on what you were asking.
Certainly. The reference to the Trail and Active Transportation Master Plan. I'm just curious, do we have a master plan reference? I was just trying to find information about that specifically. So my question is it being worked on, or where's the master?
Through you as mayor. So this grant funding is actually to develop the master plan.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
And then if I can maybe just touch on in next year, there's a recommendation for developing a general traffic master plan, which would be for the road network and traffic and parking, with the idea that could be the information that coming out of the active transportation network could then feed into the traffic master plan and kind of work around it.
Fabulous.
CAO Machado.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, just a bit more context on, just for this number of 200,000 might seem like a lot of money, but even when that study came through in 2015, I believe, the recommendation was just to maintain the roads to the current condition. We were talking about in the neighborhood of 550,000 a year that should be invested. Very few times were we able to even come close to that number. And that number is just to do pavement. The sort of where it gets more interesting is on the upside is that we get grants, like we got the grant for Gibsons Way, that kind of throws our program off in a good way, where we're kind of taking advantage of that to change our schedule per se. And also when we get water grants for water main replacements, it's hard to pass up on that opportunity. Lastly, there are a couple of sites, particularly Gower Point Road, where we've been endlessly waiting for development, at least as it would be an expensive piece of road because it requires storm, sanitary, water, and pavement done. And on a per meter basis is highly expensive. So those are the sort of three factors that have sort of dictated how much we spend each year. And one last thing, if I may, is that one of our hopes on this alternative transportation master plan is that it would also provide benefits for the amount of roads and type of roads we build in the future, And hopefully we'll have less dependence on paving as well.
Councillor DeAndrade?
My question regards the $20,000 yearly for homeless support. And is this funding coming from the province or this is taxpayer money?
I don't know the answer to that, so,
Through you, as Mayor, yes, it's tax funded,
yeah.
correct.
What is it? I don't even know. I have to, I don't know if this was something that was set by the previous council, but I'm usually fairly attuned to homelessness issues, but I am not aware of this fund, so go with the Director of Finance.
Sure, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this was a direction from previous council. It was important to have a line in the capital budget to have a general support for homelessness. No specific item was earmarked for that. It was just a priority that repetitive funding would be available each year. And the amount previously was set at 20,000. And so the taxation is the source of that. So we have included it in the full 5 years, but of course that's up to council if they want to change it. But nothing specific, just resources available on an ongoing basis.
Okay. Councillor Omley.
Yeah, through the mayor, I'm wondering, just because of the timing, I know it's been a long path, but the GDEU decommissioning, is the $32,000, is that like, I don't know, is that the final? Are we gonna see this again on, I know it's not on the 2024 up at the top here, but that's the exact final for that?
Through you as mayor, so sorry, I'm just gonna try to find the line here in the 2023. 19. Line 19, thank you. Yeah, so line 19, we've got $32,000. That's the cost to effectively buy out the last residents that are on the utility, at which point all of the services will have been decommissioned, but the physical infrastructure of the kind of the pump station and all of the ethanol will still be in the pipe in the ground. So there's a line item in 2024. It's the first line in there, line 61, $63,000. That is a high-level cost estimate to decommission that system, which would mostly be, decommissioning the building, hopefully repurposing the equipment that's in there, and extracting and disposing of the ethanol would likely be the largest cost. So there's some work for us to be done this year to look into the best way of disposing of that and what the costs associated would be. But the idea being that this year all of the residents will be off the utility. Next year we'll have decommissioned the system and it's off the books.
Thank you. So I guess it's gonna cost us money. I guess when it was leaking into the ground, we should have maybe, not, I'm just kidding, but, okay, two more things, and I'll ask, they're not major things. One thing I was thinking of, the garden suite policy update, I wonder if that started, because I know council, I think part of our, correct me, the council, mayor and council can correct me if I'm wrong, I think there were some discussions in our strategic plan about maybe like revisiting, our garden suite policy, and I'm not sure if it gets updated, and then after this council decides to maybe update it again, I don't know if the $15,000 would be wasted. So that's one question. And the other one was, I was just gonna ask, is this dog park fencing consulting construction, is that gonna appear on every budget? Because I know it was voted down last budget, so I'm just wondering if that's just gonna be, if you're gonna keep hitting me over the head with the dog park every budget year, just so I'm ready.
Good point, yeah. I was wondering about that too. Can we speak to the, what was the other one?
Garden policy.
Oh, yeah. I mean, my impression is that would be it's not that policy update would not be out of step with what the current council is looking for. I don't think, but look to the CAO.
Fortunately, our director's not here at the moment, but my recollection through Mr. Mayor is that this part is being considered as part of the update for the OCP, that there's a series of housing-related pieces, including this garden suite, sort of I think as a policy proposal, is that it would be available anywhere in town that it's feasible to build and not require a DP. So that, I think that's what this work is for.
Yeah, I thought the direction was to make it more, to expand the area and to make the process more accessible and streamlined, which I think sounds good to me. I think that aligns with our current goals, yeah. And in the dog park, where's that coming from? Where's it gonna be? Because I've never heard, perhaps just like Councillor Lumley, I've heard the one proposed place for it is not very popular, so I don't know why we'd be pursuing it further. I'll look for a director.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, so my understanding was it wasn't formally canceled, it was just deferred to a future year, and so we brought it back up for this year for council's consideration, and there is reserve funding in for it, but just that amount.
There's reserve funding, but it might not necessarily be spent again, if it's, what I'm hearing.
What's reserve?
Is it the dog park reserve? Yeah, I don't know. Director.
Sorry, I'll clarify that. So originally, when it was approved by council, originally there was taxation funding, and then the project never was finished, so it got carried over, and that funding got parked and would be brought back in. Yeah, or it could be potentially repurposed if council chose to cancel it.
Okay. Councillor Lumley.
Okay, then I'm gonna look to maybe Councillor Kroll to help me out with this. The dog park previous council, or even, I see the other Councillor DeAndretti's hands up.
Yeah.
This was approved? Like, I thought it wasn't approved.
I see Councillor DeAndretti first, I think wanted to speak on this, but is that, could you answer the question as an incumbent councillor as well, or should we jump to Councillor Kroll?
As I recall, was just postponed. Because my understanding is there's a lot of support for a dog park. And actually, Mayor, I was going to ask you, are we waiting to prepare the strategic planning to vote on this, or and therefore it will be just for next year, or we are looking at the dog park this year? Right now.
That might be quite sensible to defer it yet another year, because we do need to work on our strategic plan, and it seems like this might have been a priority of the last council. We haven't discussed it yet in our strategic planning. It wasn't, okay. Councillor Kroll.
Thank you, Mayor White. As I recall, what happened was the funding had been allocated for dog park. And then when the request for the review of DPA 2, that increased funding was needed for that, so it was decided to defer the dog park and use that funding for DPA 2. That was my recollection of where we got to where we are today.
But we have funding for DPA 2 in this budget too. That was one question I had, is that, are the DPA 1 and 2 updates, are those, was there funding that went towards those that was in 2022 as well? And this is more? Or is that the same budget, Director?
Those are carry forward projects, and so the funding, any project that isn't completed in the prior year, the funding carries forward, and this is that previous year funding being used.
So-
All of the A's are either committed or carry forwards.
Some of that may have been spent because the project's ongoing, but it's a carry forward because it's not done. That's what I'm hearing. Any other questions? And is this when we aren't, this is a committee meeting, but at least one item's already come up where we could be setting some direction or possibly deferring something. So is this the best place that staff's looking for that kind of direction? How it can be done? now, or I'll look to the CAO.
Just one, through you, Mr. Mayor, this motion that we have in front of you as well, as part of the report. Just a quick comment on that. Part of the reason for choosing these two projects in particular is because they are somewhat foundational. There are missing pieces on the tree by the whole discussion around trees in the urban forest. We really need this plan in our view. And the carbon neutral plan, we haven't had one for probably 10 years for it's about what it sets the policy for the town's direction around municipal buildings and fleet and sort of how we ourselves use energy. And so that's been missing from a policy perspective as well.
That's a grant, allocating that funds from grant, right? So
That's correct, Mr.
that's a motion we could just make right now and continue on if that's, yeah. Councillor Thompson moves that. Yeah, it's seconded by Councillor Kroll. Any discussion on that motion? Further questions? All those in favor? The motion carries. Councillor Kroll?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I was just wondering if there was any update on the potential start of work on the White Tower Park Pond.
Okay.
Through you, as Mayor, I did receive the tender package from our engineering consultants, I believe, yesterday for review. The timeline is really dependent upon when we receive the permit from the province for carrying out the work within the archaeological site. I believe from discussions that we've had with our archaeological consultants and with the province, indication is that we may be able to start work on screening the archaeological sites maybe within the next month or two, at which point construction could follow from there. I'm getting nods, so I think I got that right.
Okay, I have Councillor DeAndrade and then Councillor Lumley.
Thank you, Mayor. It's just a clarification on the question I asked before. Are we going to discuss like the dog park as this budget, or are we going to postpone in after we have the strategic discussion?
Up to you. To council. Okay, is there a motion to postpone? Moved by Councillor Lumley, seconded by Councillor Thompson. So any discussion on, so this is to postpone the dog park item. All those in favor? See, all those opposed? The motion carries. And Councillor Lumley was next.
Yeah, I know Mayor, you're asking, I don't really have too much more. I mean, the Director of Infrastructure did suggest helping the tax burden out a bit by, with respect to the Beachcomber culvert. I mean, it sounded that it goes back into the reserves, and then if it's an emergency, it just comes right back out of reserves. So, I mean, I'm not as good as explaining it as you were, but I think that would be a good plan. That would be one way to adjust this budget. And then I think they've addressed everything else that I've even asked. So that was that's all I had to say.
Okay. I am open to, we have some time for questions if there's a lot of projects here in the public interest, so I am open to questions from the public at this meeting as well, if anyone happens to have any. Denise?
Yeah, I'll just follow up with Beachcomber Lane, because I did send a letter for clarification, and I think you've answered the question. So the complication is because there is a sanitary main running down that same area. Is that why a pedestrian bridge would not be feasible? Did I hear that right?
Through you as Mayor.
Sorry, to you, Mayor.
That's my understanding. I haven't had any direct conversations. I wasn't involved with the design process for that, but my understanding is that the fact that there is a sanitary main that's crossing where that culvert is currently, the requirement of having that protected mechanically and supported underneath the pedestrian bridge would make the logistics of that be not necessarily the most viable in that spot. It would be quite challenging to be able to support and protect a sanitary main from the downstream motion of the creek with a pedestrian bridge rather than having it be buried with a culvert.
Is the intention to, if I can just finish.
Go ahead,
my
Neil.
question about that, is it the intention then to have vehicular traffic go over that culvert or just pedestrian?
Again, through you as mayor, yes, the intention is that it would be accessible for vehicles.
And is there does that make a big cost difference to the design? Because is it necessary to have a vehicle traffic going back through there? It hasn't been going there for 3 years. I don't know, we're looking at.
It's never been easy to drive through there either. It's not something I would recommend to anybody. And I don't know if we're upgrading the road in that way as part of this project. I'll look to the CAO.
There's an order of priority on that site. The creek, the crossing, just for what it's worth, the sewer line, the transportation aspect of it, whether it's just people only or with vehicles. So we've been the order of priority in general is the health of the creek, and that is quite a narrow strip. That was part of the reason that it broke down, is because there's too much water with too much intensity in a very narrow space. We anticipated in good faith to just take the culvert out, and we had extra culverts from Gibsons Way, those bottomless ones, which are quite fish friendly. When you actually try to fit those units over that site, and you need to still contend with the sewer lines, if we to put that on the side or above it, then it kind of makes it hard to stack all of the needs. And I'd also want to say that, we won't make a final recommendation to council there until I think we need to talk to the neighborhood as well, because having vehicles cross or not is an important piece. And, if we, ideally, we haven't discussed this in terms of what our preference would be, but I don't think we'd be too concerned if cars weren't going over that. Probably be easier for the creek. But that's been behind the scenes, and I apologize, it's taken a while. But between the permitting and the archaeology requirements, it just added more time, but we're comfortable that that site, if we just expand it a little bit more, it's quite important to get it right, because it determines the future of that creek in terms of its health.
Exactly. Okay, thank you so much.
And any other questions?
I have more questions.
I'll look around the council. I had one too about the joint field strategy. That I think is probably initiated by the SCRD, and I recall seeing something on there. In there are many projects, but I don't remember if that one actually passed. Most did. So I'm just wondering if this is one that's coming from the SCRD, is asking us to participate in a joint strategy.
Through you as mayor, my understanding is, yes, it was initiated by the regional district, and it's a regional study for the local governments on the Sunshine Coast to look at the use and prioritization of use for the parks, facilities, the fields across the different regions, throughout the region, from the different governments that are managing them, to come up with a level of kind of service for the various parks to, I think, identify which ones, should get certain levels of treatment and maybe have a little bit more restricted use on them. And so this would represent our contribution to that joint study.
Yeah, I'll take the opportunity to say we're doing great in Gibsons, I think, with the work the Parks Department has been doing in the fields recently, and it's really taken a leadership role in this. And I don't know if we'd stand to benefit a lot out of our own work, because we seem to be leading the pack. But I do think there's great benefit in sharing that knowledge that our Parks Department's been gaining and practicing in the last couple of years, and with the regional fields, because the regional fields are all to the benefit of Gibsons residents too.
And if I just may clarify, it's less to do with maintenance of the fields and more about how they're being used, so which user groups would be on which fields. So I think it's more of a scheduling for the local, like say the soccer organizations and whatnot, for which, you know, say men's leagues or kids or whatnot should be at which fields.
Okay, so, yeah. Other questions? Look to Denise again.
If these guys don't have any.
Public.
So, just a comment on the paving restoration plan. I understand that paving is extremely expensive and needs to be coordinated with development, et cetera. And I appreciate, you know, there being less dependence on pavement in the future. I think that's a good direction. And so just a comment, because recently, of course, at Glassford Road, the paving of Blaine Lane came up, and I just think that that is not, on both of the survey or the choices, it was there as paving Blaine Lane when you've just made a good case against paving Blaine Lane. So I just want to make that
Yep.
note.
Thank you again. Yeah, Urban Systems just keeps pitching that one, but we are hearing different from the public, and yeah.
And then I have one, just one really quick,
Sure, go ahead.
question about the aquifer report, and I think Councillor Lumley alluded to the fact that all current, just want to confirm that the current subdivision or developments that are coming down the pipe in Lower Gibsons are not going to be under the new recommendations? Or is that a timing issue that, depending where they are in the process, will have to be under the new? Did you understand where I'm going with that? Will they, if they are to a certain point in the development, will they then be subject to the new recommendations coming down the pipe in the near future?
I think our CAO could answer that again. I'll say my interpretation of what I've heard is it won't really make a difference, because we're still following peer reviews and everything that's going to inform the new policy. It's just going to, the new policy will just have it more, will firm up what is going to be done in these cases. I think that's what I've heard from our staff on this. I'll look to our CAO though.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I guess there's no get out of jail card because you got in early enough. Or I think we got this report late summer, early fall, and we began, making people aware of it. All types of partners, including the development community, and we have had pretty active conversations with all of those folks, and in fact, have requested peer reviews for their projects. So we're, in essence, in a practical way, already working where we want to be working and from a policy perspective. And that's because, as I was saying earlier to the council, the water regulation bylaw, as much as we, weren't entirely sure, our understanding now is that it has enough strength as is, and we might make some minor tweaks to it. But for the most part, we can rely on their policy to do these peer reviews for all developments.
Okay, so to protect Lower Gibsons aquifer is my concern. Yeah.
Councillor Kroll.
Thank you, Mayor White. Just sort of clarification on line 27, the wharf rehabilitation. As to the nature of the scope of that work.
Looking to CAO.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that amount came from our engineering consultants that have assessed that and are proposing sort of a rough estimate as a budget for that project to replace that portion of the structure that sits between School Road and Grandma's Pub per se. So that we're anticipating receiving drawings and going into tender as soon as possible.
For, just in follow-up to that, I was sort of the impression that that was, that bridge per se from the wharf to the Grandma's Pub, that would be, sort of fall under the owner's sort of auspices to cover the costs of replacing. It's not town property, is it?
Through you, Mr. Mayor.
CAO.
That is town property. The wharf, that property, the site, if we remove the structure, what's down below, it's a road allowance. It's a past road, I guess, or was never a road. That was constructed when Grandma's was, so they just made use of a structure that already existed. And what the town provided was an access agreement in the form of an encroachment. Under an encroachment, repairs are done as needed, but much like when someone encroaches on a piece of sidewalk or a road, as that structure breaks down, we don't have folks with those encroachments completely replace the sidewalk. And so, in our view, this is a town structure to maintain. And which is not to say that we won't seek financial compensation from the folks using the site, accessing it, or the future site, but that's somewhat of a separate conversation that's still to be had.
Thank you. Any other questions? Is there anything more from staff on this?
If you, sorry, Mr. Mayor, if you'd like me to provide some context about where we're at and what decisions you've made
Great.
and what needs next.
Thank
Sure.
you.
So at this meeting, council has committed approved the funding for the LG cap, and so that was already in the budget, so it has no impact on taxation. The postponement of the dog park, so we'll move that, I'm presuming, to 2024. The comments, so currently the way the budget was proposed, the way it's laid out right now, if no further changes are made, the required taxation is an additional 4.97% from a taxation point of view. So because total taxation in 2023 is 321 and we have 138 coming out of the operational budget, the Director of Infrastructure commented on a couple of pieces we could move over to the potential grant funding. If we did that, we could repurpose partial of the drainage reserves, and that would bring the required taxation funding that is still missing down to just over $44,000, and that's just over a 1.2% tax increase. And so that could be addressed either through moving some other projects off. The large one is the OCP, so that one's hard to move because it's such a big chunk. There are some smaller ones, like we mentioned before, the homelessness support, and then there's those smaller ones there. Those could be moved, or council could choose an additional tax increase. So that's sort of the decisions you have to make. If we do have one more meeting next week, which is March 21st, and that's where the final direction that staff need ideally from council to further on the financial plan. If you make no further changes today, what we would do is bring back the capital plan, the general capital plan, the way it's shown right now, and then I would bring a report that shows the changes in ops made to date, and then we'd basically present again, and you'd have another opportunity to give us some more direction at that point. So I just want to make it really clear about the taxation piece. Okay, thank you.
So there's $44,000 in taxation here that is not covered by our, basically, what was it, a 7.4?
6.5.
6.4%.
Yeah. So, sorry, that's assuming that the information the Director of Infrastructure provided earlier about moving some money around, if that, moving those two to potential grant for the time being, and repurposing of reserves. If council is good with that, staff can make that change, and then it leaves 44,000 left. And so at this point, the direction that we've received from council/committee has been a total of 6.5% tax increase for this year. 5 of that was for RCMP and 1.5 was for operations, so a total of 6.5, aside from what you're dealing with here today.
Oh, okay. Well, it's not, yeah, that's just, so it's 6.5 plus another 44, so that's 7.1. Okay,
Sorry.
go ahead.
6.5% plus 44,000, which equates to 1.2%.
Yeah,
So
so it's a 7 point,
sorry.
yeah. 7, yeah. So, yeah, Director.
And just to add to that, Mr. Mayor, if you're looking at lines 52 being the homelessness support, and then lines 54 to 58 totals, roughly, I think that's actually exactly 48,000, just for consideration.
Line 52.
And then lines 54 through 58. So there's a number of parks projects in there, one of which being the joint field strategy that we spoke to. But I believe that there's a total of about $48,000 taxation in those projects, just for consideration.
Yeah, consideration of, possibly not doing them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think there are, that's an option for council we're looking at a 7.7% increase now, to try to get that down. There might be some other.
So just for clarification, the choice could be to not do them, or you could defer them to a future year as well. So keep them on the list, but just not impacting 2023 taxation.
Now, we didn't talk specifically about all these little things, like, yeah, I mean, some of them are like flagpole retrofits, washroom heating. I assume they're things that need to be done, though. Councillor Lumley.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to make single motions for everyone, but I'd support losing the homelessness support as a line item, because is that not, are we not doubling up on everyone needs a home, Gibsons? Is that not homelessness as well, that $35,000?
Is that in here somewhere? Or the grant?
Yeah, it's
The grant,
the grant funded.
yeah,
okay.
that's grant funded until the end of July, or is it the end of August or July? Somewhere in this summer, yeah.
Yeah, so we've got a grant. Maybe we don't need this line item for 20,000 if we've already got 35 in grant.
Yeah, I don't, like I said, I wasn't here when that allocation was initially made. I'm not sure what was in mind, but I mean, it could be used to extend that position further. We are advocating to the provincial government to continue to get that Everybody Needs a Home provincial funding, and not have to pay for that locally, which I think probably a lot of local governments should be doing. It's rather than accept downloading of provincial services. So is that a motion to remove the 20,000? And was there anything else too? No, it's just the 20 for.
You can make one motion.
Sure. Yeah. Is there a seconder? Okay. Seconded by Councillor DeAndrade. Okay, question for Councillor Kroll first. On the motion?
With respect to the removal of the
Yeah.
homeless funding, as I recall, wasn't it directed for things like the warming shelters and just costs that we've incurred with other aspects of funding that isn't covered by the Everyone Needs a Home? Because I know when we opened the warming shelters and that there were costs involved.
Okay. I'm not aware of that, and I also don't know about the. My understanding is, I mean, there's renovation going on at the Marine Room for hopefully for general benefit to the public over the future, but with homelessness supports in mind. But I understand that can be covered with some of the COVID restart funds. But we're advocating to BC Housing for help with that as well, which is underway. But I don't know if this $20,000 was needed for that. I think that's important to ask. Yeah, it isn't.
It's not needed for that.
No, okay. And I'm not aware of any other costs that were. No, I don't see. And Councillor D'Andrade, did you have a question or any more discussion on this motion, or was that just the second? Okay. Discussion on the motion. All those in favor? The motion carries. So that brings it down to 24,000 extra. What would that tax increase be?
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, can I clarify, was that for, because the homelessness support was every year repeating? Just totally.
Yeah. It's
Okay.
not identified as needed at this point, but will could always be brought back in further years. I think there could be other places in the budget too I'd want to look that aren't in front of us today, of particularly allocating some of the funds that I'm engaged. I'm talking to the RCMP about some of the support that we give to victim services and restorative justice. Those line items, they're line items now, and how in other communities it's often traffic fine revenue that pays for those. Communities that are over 5,000 pay for services like that with traffic fine revenue. And I'm trying to find out if our traffic fine revenue goes to Seashell. And Gibsons, so fines collected in Gibsons are actually going to Seashell, and to me, that would make sense if they're paying for the regional service, since they're receiving all the regional funds for it. So I'm looking into that, and I asked the RCMP last week, and they've passed the question on to somebody provincially. So that might be another place. Councillor Lumley.
Again, I'm going to go back to this, I guess, well, I wasn't there before, but joint field strategy. And I understand from the Director of Infrastructure Services, I mean, I was at the regional board meetings on Thursday, and they presented all those statistics for the usages over a 4-year period, because they were comparing them against. They had the numbers for COVID, but they compared them against, they went back to 2019 to compare 2022. But they never spoke of any, I didn't hear of any joint strategy or anything on how to plan the fields. So I'm just not sure if, like the joint field strategy, I'm not sure how that's $8,000 in taxation. That's all. I'm just curious.
I'm a bit confused by it too. I mean, we basically have, unless we're counting, we have one field, unless we're counting the Dempster, which is totally kind of looked after by the Ball Association. It's not. So I don't see where Gibsons would be. I mean, I can understand why the SCRD wants a strategy for all its fields up and down the coast. I still don't understand what this is paying for. Like, would they actually be hiring a consultant to set out a field schedule for them, which would be bizarre to me, because like bringing in a consultant who wouldn't be.
That would get paid through the scheduling of the fields and events, though. I don't understand.
Yeah, right. Does anyone know anything more about this? Because I'm trying to put together what they're asking for. Councillor Kroll.
Not through you, Mr. Mayor, not that I have an answer to it, but we already, in our taxes to the RD, we have a huge portion we pay for recreation, so I would certainly appreciate more clarification on why we're being charged an additional $8,000.
We're also now paying more in the joint use function too, which has come up in the last budget session. So, yeah, I could see the logic of taking this out. Right, CAO?
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, I was just gonna suggest that we could bring you more information at our next meeting, but unfortunately I don't have anything at the moment
Okay.
on those details.
Do we want to remove this, though? Is that what I'm looking for? Okay, is that a motion by Councillor Lumley? I saw him shrug and nod, okay. Councillor Lumley moves that we remove this $8,000 for joint field strategy, seconded by Councillor Kroll. Discussion? Is that for discussion, Councillor Thompson?
No.
Yeah, okay. All those in favor? The motion carries. More quick math. I think that's probably good for now, yeah. Should we move on to our next topic, which is the Growing Communities Grant? The hottest topic in the province right now.
Thank you, Mayor White. The purpose of the report is to just formally notify that the town has been awarded $2.314 million through the Growing Communities Fund from the province. In review of the funding and the capital projects that have been presented to date, staff have identified kind of three general approaches that we could take for, or that the council could choose to take for allocating this funding. And we've presented it as the opportunity to supplement the general capital project plan. So as we were just discussing, there's a reliance on taxation to fund the capital program under the General Services Fund. This money could be used to supplement that to reduce the tax burden in coming years. Another opportunity would be to offset the debt funding that has been allocated and would be in the future allocated to some projects. So considering a recent project being in the Sanitary Service Fund for the centrifuge replacement as an example of that. The other kind of concept is that the funding could be used for some larger projects that would be considered strategic priority by council or by the town. And there are some ongoing studies such as the Sanitary Master Plan and the Active Transportation Master Plan, which is on the budget for this year, that could present some opportunities for some projects that may be identified in the future. It could also be considered, thinking about this funding as short, medium, and long term as well. So we'll pass it over to council for discussion and questions.
Okay, and I'll pass the chair over to Councillor Kroll because I'm going to run out for just a minute here. You can do that. Let's go ahead. Any questions on this or? I'll be back. I'm not going to miss much.
Councillor Lumley, just to the Director of Infrastructure, I think there's a unique opportunity to get some of these projects covered with this funding with today's dollars rather than us putting the money in the bank or putting it into reserves and then looking at the project costs coming down the road at us, which have increased at the alarming rates that everything is increasing these days. So what I would suggest at this point, subject to Mayor White concurring and the rest of council, that if we could get a report from staff. You've highlighted some of the projects that, we've got the water main replacement on Skyline, the centrifuge. So I would appreciate from staff a couple of key projects that you think this funding should go to. We have our sort of Christmas shopping list, but you're the people having to deal with the reality of day to day. So I would certainly recommend you coming back to us, perhaps even at the next meeting with, your priority wish list. And I would look to staff for their comments. Councillor Dandretti.
Thank you. In theory, I agree with Councillor Crowe, but I would like to hear from the Director of Finance, her expertise in terms of interest, the current situation, because obviously when you look at $1 million loan and you pay half in 10 years term, is this old figures or based on the current inflation? I would like just some expert advice. What would be the best course in this particular next years of high inflation?
Okay, so is the money spent yet? Sorry, I had to step out. But I'll look to the director to answer that question.
Mr. Mayor. And so it's a really challenging time. So the estimate that I provided for council was based on the current 10-year loan rate that the Municipal Finance Authority has posted. Any new debt that we would get, we wouldn't get until the spring of 2024. And so it's projecting to go back down to a bit more normal, although the things in the States last couple of days have shaken everybody up. So what we're finding though is the costs the future costs associated with inflation have been quite significant. And so to Councillor Crow's point, moving projects farther out, the more expensive they get, the better use of money now. However, it's really, there is the one identified project that the director and I had been talking about purposing for debt was a centrifuge, just because it's so timely. It's quite a critical piece of infrastructure. Council wouldn't have to, spend all this money at once. There are some other key, I would refer to the Director of Infrastructure in terms of priorities of what projects are his priority. However, right now, I think the inflation pressures are more than the debt cost pressures right now.
Councillor Lumley.
Yeah, I agree. Some priorities should be brought back, but just personally, from my perspective, it'd be really nice if we could somehow get like a win for some things that we would never get to pay for. Like if we didn't get this money, like it's like maybe coupling like an infrastructure improvement with something that can also benefit the community from like like a recreational, like I just think of the sea walk, right? So imagine, and this has come up in our budget talks, and the sewer trunk line, like we have to do all these improvements. It has to be moved based on seawater levels and climate change and impact. If we could use part of this, or if it could be, if you guys could work your magic and bring it back so that, hey, listen, here's a major portion of infrastructure that we need to deal with, that we can now deal with, and the side benefit is that it's under the seawall, the path, and that could be benefited, and we could make some improvements and really not only do infrastructure, but actually give something tangible back to the community at the same time. If that's possible, I'd really like to look at those. Yeah.
Is that something we can look at? Is that enough information?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think we can certainly, we do have a list of projects already that we contemplated bringing them forward now. At this point, we thought an open-ended discussion would be a good starting point. So that list of projects will be easy for us to bring forward. Thinking about some of the kind of secondary benefits of it, that'll maybe take a little bit of time to kind of put a little bit of creative thought into where we might be able to see some tangential benefits. But I think that's certainly something that we can come back with.
And that whole concept is something that connects to a number of items that we have on the capital plan here, including the foreshore improvements, which I see here just right under the 2023 with no real It's just kind of floating in there in between years, in the hope that money might come along for it, perhaps, yeah. Any other questions or discussion on this item? I guess that this probably the best thing council could do at this stage is to come up with other ideas or concepts that we want staff to look at to bring forward later. Director?
Just one comment on this sort of time sensitivity. If a decision is made around using this funding for the centrifuge project, that will impact whether or not staff initiate the alternative approval process, which is a bit of an administratively cumbersome process and it's quite involved. So if a decision is made to not commit that funding to it, that process will need to be started effectively tomorrow, so that we can get the AAP out as soon as we can to then be able to make the purchase for the replacement of the centrifuge as soon as possible. If council is leaning in the direction of perhaps directing the funding that way, it would be good for staff to know as soon as possible, so that we could not commit too deeply into starting that AAP process. So not to say that a decision needs to be made immediately, but that is the only part of this decision that has some sense of time sensitivity, just because of the impact on starting that AAP process.
Yeah, understood. Where is that in the, what line is that again? Or is it it's in a different, it's on a different page, right? I know I saw it.
Yeah, the sanitary financial plan is the last page of the agenda. It's the first line item.
Yeah. Any thought, Councillor Kroll?
Through you, Mayor White, just for clarification, while you were out of the room, what I had suggested to staff or proposed to council that we ask staff for a list of their priorities that would be beneficial to spend the money now rather than put it into reserves or anything like that, where we might not have the interest rates comparable to what we're facing with inflation rates. So it was sort of suggested that they come back with their list of priorities before we give them our list, our sort of Christmas shopping list. But to Councillor Lumley's point, I think, if there's, combined synergies that can be come up with, that, there are benefits, by all means, but, we do have some fair, and the borrowing process that we could be going through with a couple of these projects, it might be beneficial to defer to staff for their input at this point.
I think it would probably help for our own process to try to get as many of our own ideas and projects out on the table right now as well, just for staff to look into, because when it comes to something like the centrifuge, we may be looking at trying to make that decision in a timely manner, and we need to balance that with other possibilities, right? So if we don't have those other possibilities estimated or costed out, then we can't really make that decision. So we do have the concept of looking at the seawalk and other associated consequences of that, like connected activities like the foreshore project. And if there are any others, I'd urge councillors to, even if they come up in the next few days, like just email them into me, and I'll share that over to staff to look into. Councillor Lumley?
Yeah, again, that idea was kind of coupled with the fact that I know there's a grant. Is there not? Is there a grant application, or we've received? I know the discussion came up, was that part of that we can't actually move the sewer?
Through you as mayor, so that there's a grant application has been submitted to improve the foreshore between Armours Beach and the wharf. The funding for that will not cover the costs of replacing the sanitary main, But given if that grant was successful and we did receive the funding for that, we would have, and the opportunity would be there really to replace that sanitary main. We've had costing from our engineers to replace it in place and relocate it to up to Marine Drive to get it out of the foreshore. And I think the cost for replacing in place was in the hundreds of thousands. I don't remember the exact number. Getting it up onto Marine Drive would be significantly more expensive, but.
Yeah, that's kind of like, that's what I was thinking, that we could synergize them, but I'd be a hypocrite if I said, let's go ahead and borrow money right now, because I spent half a day at the regional district lambasting them for borrowing so much money on so many new projects. And it's like I think it's over 4%. Is it still over 4% right now? I think and then we've got loans on our books at like 1.2. Like it's the difference in the cost, which is already in the report, is quite substantial. So that's why I was talking about the synergy, but I do agree. I think that's what Councillor Kroll's saying as well, is that, if something's imminent and we have to spend the money, then I would support using it instead of borrowing, going through that process, just because if the rates, I don't think we're going into a long period of inflation or anything. In fact, most of what I'm reading is Canada's kind of more sheltered against it than the US. So I think these rates are going to come down eventually. And then if we really want to do something that isn't as is more of a primary or an immediate need, then I guess that would be the time to borrow. So
How does that relate to the centrifuge, though? Like engaging in, when you're saying this, like getting out a loan right now for that project for $950,000.
I'm saying don't.
Yeah, it'd be better to spend the grant money on it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
If
direct.
we have to borrow, then I'd be supportive of spending the grant money on it.
Through you, as Mayor, just a quick comment on that. The AAP that was approved previously, I believe in February, was to cover both the centrifuge replacement and the force main from the Proust Road lift station up to the wastewater treatment plant. That project is not considered to be as time sensitive as the centrifuge, so a decision could be made to fund the centrifuge replacement at this time and defer the force main replacement until 2024 and couple it with another project for an AAP to go out either later this year or next year.
Okay. I'm looking, I see nods from councillors on this. There's some interest in that concept. So, Councillor Thompson?
Through the mayor, yeah, the centrifuge was brought up as well in depth at the last meeting too. It's a major priority. I agree. It's a great allocation of these funds, and it seems like it's of the interest of staff to make it a priority as well.
Okay. So could I interpret that as a motion to move things forward?
I'll second it.
Correct.
That's to fund the centrifuge project of the $950,000 centrifuge project with the Growing Communities Fund grant?
Yes, correct.
Okay. Moved by Councillor Thompson, seconded by Councillor Lumley. Discussion on this motion? All those in favor of the motion? The motion carries. Okay, well, hopefully that saves some work there. Starting an AAP that we might end up. Good question. Yeah, I mean this is on the 5-year capital plan. The other piece of this is pushing the other project forward.
Through his mayor, yes.
Yeah.
So if we're not going to proceed with the AAP for the centrifuge replacement, we wouldn't pursue AAP funding for the range of $300,000-$400,000. So a decision I suppose would be made to defer that project until 2024.
Okay, so that'd be to postpone the what what's the language that I should use for this project?
The force main replacement from the Proust Road lift station to the wastewater treatment plant.
Okay, let's, that. Counselor Lumley,
Moving that.
moving that,
Whatever he said, I'm moving.
yeah. And that's to postpone, because I know that language is preferred. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Counselor Kroll. Any discussion? All those in favor? That motion carries. Okay. Okay. We're setting some direction here on a lot of money. This is good. We do have something else to discuss in camera. Councillor DeAndrade, do you have another
Yes, thank you.
suggestion?
I'm just wondering, after, this is a reduction of $916,000, if there's any hope that our budget would go down, our taxes, whatever is being calculated, if there's, it seems a significant number. So I wonder if there's a quick answer for that.
I think no, but yeah.
Right, through you, Mr. Mayor. So the centrifuge is funded through the sewer utility, and those rates, council had approved a 5% tax increase for that utility just recently. And so it won't have any impact on the taxation, the general taxation percentage, because that's a different funding stream. And at this point, I wouldn't see that it would, I wouldn't look to having a change to that 5%, because we've already put the 5% in for user and user fees, and then it would affect the parcel tax for sewer. The benefit it will have, though, is it's going to basically help remove the debt costing out of the long-term sewer financial plan. So we'll reflect that in the next version, and you'll see potentially, because sewer, the long-term financial plan for sewer, the increases, we were lagging a bit behind water, and the 5% we're going to be extending out past 2030, and so this might help with that, timing of that. So I think eventually we will see the benefit, just not this specific year.
Thank you. Could I get a motion to move in camera based on section 91K of the community charter? Moved by Councillor Kroll, seconded by Councillor Thompson. All those in favor? The motion carries. Thanks.